Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this fine Tuesday morning for a NextNet webinar. We are going to be discussing Office 365. You chose it, but are you fully prepared for that migration? Because there's sometimes more to it than you might think at first. So I am the host today, Ned Bellavance. I'm the Director of Cloud Solutions for NextNet. And joining me today, I have Matt Deeroff. Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm pre-sales at NextNet, working on our cloud team here.
Yeah, and I would say that both of us not only are in the pre-sales portion of things, but we've also both been in the trenches deploying Office 365. So this is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts, or at least near to our hearts. Okay. If I could get the slide deck actually moving. There we go. All right. Not quite enough coffee yet this morning. All right. So preparing for your Office 365 migration. We've identified 3 key phases. So Matt, why don't you take us through a brief summary of what those 3 phases are?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our experience, Office 365 migration, it's great to choose the technology. We know a lot of thought and effort goes into that, and a lot of our customers today have chosen that path, but we also want to be successful when sending our users to Office 365, migrating to Office 365, and really, making our users or customers more productive and efficient. So through our experience, we've really found that there are 3 key areas to that. One being an envision phase, 2, the deploy, and 3, drive value. And those 3 phases really encompass the planning of your migration to make sure every aspect is laid out and you have a solid plan and you're successful implementing that plan.
Okay. So why don't we dive more into the Envision and what's sort of involved there? So just broadly speaking, when we're talking about planning, there's a few key aspects that I know that we try to dive into a little more heavily. One of those is workforce mobility. So what's sort of the idea or concept behind workforce mobility as a category?
Yeah, absolutely. So choosing Office 365 enables a lot more access, let's say, to your users, your customers. So things that you may not have thought of before, enable your customers to work really from anywhere. Office 365 provides the means from bring your own device, whether that be a cell phone, a cousin's computer, your home computer, all
Right.
of those things. So really, your workforce can be completely mobile. They don't necessarily have to have an office space.
Right.
They can work from the train on their laptop or the plane on their phone.
Yep.
So really, it makes your data a lot more accessible. So workforce mobility, right?
Yeah, your workforce is super mobile. You can use devices you can access from anywhere. It is a cloud service, right? So that might be a little different from when you're working in a more on-premises deployment, where you might severely limit connectivity back to your SharePoint or Exchange sites or stuff like that.
And a lot of times that's a VPN connection where you're securely connected back.
Right. So that kind of leads into the second bubble, which is, all right, I've got my mobile workforce. They're accessing stuff from their cousin's computer. That could be problematic. So
exactly.
How do we make sure that we're protecting this potentially sensitive data that they're accessing from wherever?
Right. So as part of the Envision phase, we really see data protection as aligning the tools that you have today and the Office 365 tools you may or may not have purchased with your security policies to make sure you're compliant.
Right.
So whether that's a conditional access policy that says, we need multi-factor authentication and you're allowed to access this from this location when we know it's you, to your data loss prevention scenarios where, I don't want to download my SharePoint drive, to my cousin's computer. And
yeah, well, we don't want you to do that.
Right, exactly. We would hope that would not happen, yes.
And I guess the last bubble there, data migration, that's really about the actual, how are you going to get all of this information from your existing data sources up to Office 365. So like what?
Exactly.
I guess we could dive more into the key considerations there. We've got a slide about that, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I know we've done a webinar about email migration, I believe, in particular. So there's a lot more detail in that webinar. But data migration in general. So what are your data sources? How is it used today?
Right.
How am I going to migrate it? What does that plan timing look like? All of those scenarios.
Yeah. Figuring out, I've got 10 terabytes of data or 100 terabytes of data to move. How long is that realistically going to take? That's stuff that you need to really take into consideration when you're planning.
Right.
So a question that comes up a lot is like, how do you adopt Office 365? And for us, the answer to that is just like the old adage about how do you eat an elephant? You do it one bite at a time, right? Office 365 has a whole bunch of different services and features, and it can get overwhelming and confusing, and you might just be like, I don't even know where to start. So part of this planning process, for me at least, is a lot about planning out which bites you're going to take off first and which you're going to leave till later.
That's a great adage. It fits perfect with Office 365.
It really is like the elephant, right? Or the 800-pound gorilla or whatever, but we don't want to eat gorillas.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, kind of leveraging off of that, when we start thinking about goals and scenarios, I think like the first thing that we really stress with clients is you have to think about what the usage scenarios are for your end users, how they're going to be using Office 365 in the office, in the field, and use that to drive what products and features you're going to light up first in Office 365.
Yeah, exactly. And if without selecting those products and features and knowing exactly how your users are going to use them initially, it becomes really difficult to deploy Office 365.
Right.
Like you said, with the amount of services that are available.
Right. You click on that waffle, and you see 26 different applications, and you just might feel a little overwhelmed as an end user. Right. So if you can sort of pare that down and give your end users direction initially on how to start using the services, I feel like that could go a long way.
Right. And a lot of it, is a work in progress. Whiteboarding sessions are great for this. A lot of times you don't really, at a high level, we understand we're going to migrate email or we're going to migrate SharePoint.
Right.
But what does that look like when you dive deeper? What are those other features beneath, Exchange Online or Skype for Business or Teams that we really need to worry about or manage or enable for our users to work the way we want them to be able to work?
Yeah, so if I could boil it down to some key planning considerations, first one is you got to figure out who are the people that are going to be important to this migration. Who are your stakeholders? Because they are going to help you champion that program up the stack. And then who are your influencers at the various business units within your organization, because they're going to help you sell the value of Office 365 down the stack to all the end users, right?
Absolutely.
And then to go back to the elephant metaphor, this is a journey. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So find some quick wins, something that's going to drive value for end users, and tackle those first.
Yeah, and we really find that those quick wins can help adoption greatly. So if there's some key pain points that you hear a lot that Office 365 can fix, obviously you want to take those quick wins and get people using it. It becomes much easier to deploy your other services.
Right. A huge one is I think managers being able to, users being able to handle and manage their passwords.
Yes.
Like the number one help desk call is usually, I need help because I locked my account out, or I forgot my password because I changed it on Friday and it's Monday.
Right.
So being able to light up self-service password reset and self-service account unlock, that drops your help desk calls and makes your users super happy.
Right. That's a win for both sides.
Yeah.
Lower help desk calls, happier users.
Yeah. Whoa, mind blown, right? But in addition to that, just building a good communications plan up front, you can't over communicate what you're trying to do with Office 365. That's just generally good project management in general, is to have a great communications plan. But but it's especially important to communicate out what the changes are, when they're going to be made, what the impact is to users, and here's how you can learn more. For those users that are feeling a little more empowered about things, make them part of the conversation as opposed to just an edict coming down from IT on high.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of different ways to communicate, and we'll jump into a little bit of that later. But really, keeping your customers, your users involved, making them feel like they're a part of it, and them knowing what's going on has been key to successful deployment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah, just having a solid plan that everyone knows and understands. You got regular check-ins. Really having a plan at the outset is going to save you a ton of headaches later.
Exactly, and you can get, obviously executive buy-in for that plan. You get support throughout the organization, and it really makes moving through those key phases a lot easier and more successful.
And then the next key phase would be deployment, right?
Yes, the fun part.
Deployment is the fun part. It's where things get exciting. The vision becomes reality. But there are some things you got to do to make that vision a reality. And I guess the first few things are like preparation, setup, and prep. So first of all, you got to figure out if there's anything blocking your migration.
Yeah, and that could be, a number of different areas from, your infrastructure. Does your Active Directory need cleaning up? What are we going to sync to Office 365? All those infrastructure related questions to make sure we're in compliance. If we have Exchange on premise, can we connect it to our hybrid Office 365?
Right.
Really laying the groundwork to complete that migration when that happens.
Right.
As well as, there could be client blockers. Deploy Office 365 Pro Plus or Outlook Suite. What version of Outlook do users have today? Do we need to upgrade our workforce? That's
certainly something
be a huge
we run
hurdle.
into is, someone will have Outlook 2007 and that I don't even think that can connect to 365 anymore.
Right.
That's a 12-year-old program. It's not going to work.
Wow, 12 years.
You got to get Office Pro Plus rolled out to that user before they can even think about connecting.
Exactly.
And another thing that we run into is like, you're not on the latest service pack or cumulative update of Exchange, so you can't set up hybrid mode to do the migration. A lot of the stuff you figure out in the planning phase. Deploy is where you actually have to remediate that stuff, and that's the whole mitigating on-premises issues is remediating all these problems that you found, and then doing that initial configuration setup of your Office 365 tenant.
Yeah, exactly. Making sure your AD is connected, everything's syncing the way you want. Perhaps set up, automatic license assignment, things like that, and really configuring the services, the back-end services.
Yeah, one of the best new features that was introduced like 6 months ago or something was the ability to assign licenses through groups.
Yes.
So you can create a group that's called like E3 with Planner or something, and assign licenses to that group, and that they get E3 with Planner, and then all you have to do to assign licenses is put people in the group. It's
exactly.
that simple.
And it makes delegation great from assigning licenses to, you can make that part of your onboarding, offboarding process.
Right.
Automate that or have, your service desk do that.
Yep. Or you can even use dynamic groups where it's using a query to say, if you're in this department, you get added to this group that gets this license.
Yeah.
And then all it is HR has to make sure they're in the right department, and everything else just syncs right up.
Yeah, it makes things a lot.
It's huge.
Yes.
Yeah,
we like that one.
Little experience, a little pain with that one. Huh? In terms of like tasks and considerations, things that you really want to keep in mind, and stuff you're going to have to do, networking is something that sometimes doesn't get as much focus as it really needs. There's a couple things about networking that you need to prepare for. One is your DNS configuration. So public DNS, you need to be able to associate your custom domains with your tenant. And so you're going to have some level of control over your DNS, which, believe it or not, there have been times where we've had a project thrown into halt because no one knows who has access to the DNS zone to add records.
Yep, absolutely. Or, in other instances, we need to submit the request to meet our timeline to the networking group.
Right.
So they'll make the change when we need it to be made.
Exactly. And then evaluating your client needs, if you think about how network traffic changes when you go to Office 365, now your clients, instead of going to an on-premises server for their mail and for SharePoint and other services, now they're reaching out through your internet connection. So there's a pretty good chance that your bandwidth requirements might go up.
And they might change. So, some of our customers, MPLS, traditional MPLS, they backhaul all their internet through a main office.
Right.
So that doesn't need to be the case with Office 365, or it could definitely make that load a lot higher if we're running all the Office 365 services back through a hub site.
Right. So, ideally for Office 365, you're sending that internet traffic directly from whatever site you're at, instead of backhauling it, because what Microsoft actually does on their side is they have connection points all throughout the globe. And when you go and ask to connect to Office 365, it points you to the closest connection point to you, and then your traffic runs across the Microsoft backbone back to wherever your tenant actually exists.
Yeah.
That's a much better connection than you're probably going to have on your MPLS WAN.
Yeah, and in turn, a much better experience for your users.
And you want your users to have a good experience so that you don't get calls.
Yes.
Getting into identity, I think the biggest thing is you just have to figure out what's your identity approach.
Yeah, I agree.
You're probably already planned for that. And I'd say, 99, but like 3/4 of people are going to set up Azure AD Connect and synchronize their existing Active Directory.
Yeah. Yeah, and that makes the most sense. We run into scenarios where, using another cloud service provider for email and some Office 365 where you have those multiple logins, moving to a single sign-on by synchronizing your Active Directory.
Right.
Is a huge benefit.
And you have to decide, are you going to do single sign-on with something like ADFS? Are you going to do same sign-on where you're synchronizing the password, but it's actually kind of technically a separate account? Or are you going to do the new pass-through authentication, which is a whole other feature?
Right.
Obviously, that's stuff you work out in the planning, but when you actually go to deploy it, that's when you find out the little things you might not have known about your environment.
Yes, exactly.
Where did that other AD forest come from? We had that. And then, that goes hand in hand with access. How are you going to allow users access to the environment? And that's a lot around setting up conditional access policies in Azure to handle incoming requests for connections.
Yeah, exactly. We touched on that a little bit earlier. Depends who the user is and where they're connecting from. Do we require multi-factor authentication? Those types of scenarios.
Yeah, if we wanted to dive into that a little deeper in terms of access management, some of that is just going to be I need to evaluate who the user is, where they're coming from, and what device they're using.
Right.
And those three factors are going to determine whether or not I give them access. If I do give them access, am I going to require multi-factor authentication for that access? And once they are granted access, do they get to use the thick client and the full experience, or do they get like the web browser only and they're restricted where they can't download any files or anything like that?
Right. And we find this to be one of the most important pieces when planning a deployment.
Right.
It's a lot of things that, sometimes being new to Office 365, you don't necessarily think about until you get into, a lot of your customers are in the deployment phase. They want to roll it out. And just thinking of these access management things now. So Those are definitely considerations from the envisioning, and then deploying them as part of your rollout is extremely important when you're giving users this kind of access.
And then like mobile device management, you obviously have to have some sort of strategy because people are going to be using their tablets and phones and even unregistered devices.
Yep.
So how are you going to handle that? Microsoft has Intune that can handle that. There are other third-party products that you may already have in your org. So hopefully in the planning portion, you made a decision. Are you going to stick with those third-party tools, or are you going to move over to Intune?
Right. And either way, generally there's some sort of, not migration, but change involved in that. So instances where devices may need re-enrollment, that's important from the start in your communication plan to make sure users know that, even if you continue with your existing MDM. Or they'll definitely need re-enrollment in how Intune is going to manage your mobile devices and communicate that those new features or that new enrollment to your users so they know what to expect if they're used to your previous product.
Yeah, it's enough that their email suddenly got migrated and now they have a new, Outlook profile, but if their mobile device just stops working, that's not a great experience.
Right.
Yeah. So when you're deploying that, you definitely want to be very cognizant of that and test it.
Yes.
Don't just think it's going to work.
Right. A pilot is extremely useful in that scenario. Yes.
So, assuming that we've been successful with our envisioning and we've been successful with our deployment of Office 365, I think the next big category was driving value. And how would you describe driving value? Because it could mean a couple different things.
Right. I think driving value definitely can cross a couple pillars.
Okay.
We obviously want to get the most value out of our investment. So, paying X for Office 365, we want to utilize all the features we can and make our staff as productive as possible.
Right.
So that's one way to drive value. Another way to drive value is for your users. Making your users more efficient, making collaboration easier, making them or allowing them to do their jobs more efficiently, more timely from any location is huge business value.
I want to dive down on that collaboration thing a little bit, because if there's one thing that I always saw in Microsoft presentations pre-Office 365 was this sort of vision of, if you ran all the Microsoft products together, you could have this unified, amazing collaboration environment. Yes. And that meant you had to have SharePoint latest version installed, Exchange latest version, Skype latest version, and you had to get all those things talking together just right. And then you'd have the ideal Microsoft experience.
Right.
That was really hard to do as an on-prem admin.
Yes, and it would work in the demo lab, 1 out of 3 times.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, the big change for me was when we migrated people to Office 365, somebody else was in charge of making sure all those components were talking properly, and it all, for the most part, just worked.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you could actually give that collaborative, immersive experience where they're using Outlook and they can see someone's status on Skype or Teams now.
Yep.
And then they could jump directly into a conversation through there. You could collaborate in real time on documents on SharePoint, which is like,
That's been the biggest one. Yeah.
Anybody who's used Google Docs is like, yeah.
Why can't we do that?
Well, now you can. Yeah. It's so exciting. And for users who have gotten used to all of these features and options in their personal life, with stuff like Google's suite of things or
Box or Dropbox.
Yeah. They've been wanting to have this stuff, and now you need to show that it is available and that they can start using it for their productivity at work.
Yeah, and that's a lot of value from both sides. So you enable your users to work the way they want to work and potentially consolidate a suite of products and make things easier for IT to manage and support. And in a lot of instances, OneDrive is a huge piece of that collaboration tool. So
yeah,
we see a lot of customers, they have Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, and what their users want. They didn't have the ability to do that before, to share files with outside people, even share files with their coworkers or send email links to files.
Right.
And giving them that ability to work that way is huge value. And then you can also, deprecate those other services that you don't want your files unsecurely just going wherever your users send them.
Right, because they probably set up that Dropbox outside of your usual corporate, guidelines. There's like, well, I need to share this file, and I got this free Dropbox account. Here we go.
That doesn't happen.
No, no one would ever do that. So, I mean, a couple different ways to help drive that value. Actually hold launch and training events, like whether it's by department or by office or whatever you want to do, whether it's in person or it's a webinar or something internally, have launch and training events that get users comfortable with it and make sure that the experience is immersive. If you're just talking at slides for 3 hours, users are going to come away and not remember any of it.
Right. And we found a combination to be great. So, lunch and learn type scenarios are great. Provide some lunch. Bring a couple devices. Let them see how how they're gonna enroll their device. Let them play with those devices.
Right.
even setting up a kiosk at, the cafeteria area, giving away free, free fun thing, or the pop things for your phone, or
right, tchotchkes of some kind.
Yeah, with a URL or some information about the migration.
Right, and I know, a good example is my wife's school adopted Office 365, and they had one of their IT guys just recorded a series of training videos and made them available on their local SharePoint and published that out. And then also had some reinforcement stuff for it where, okay, you just watched it, now you go walk through that task.
Right.
And I mean, that's how people really learn is you see it, you do it,
right.
And now it starts gelling in your brain a little bit. And then encouraging ongoing engagement, like reach out to users and say, are you happy with Office 365? What would you like to see? What are your main pain points? What are you excited about that you think other people need to know about? And sometimes you can even convince them to, put a little presentation together of their own.
Right. I mean, it is extremely difficult to understand how everyone works. There's so many different people, so many different ways of doing things. Actually reaching out after your users have been using Office 365 after the deployment and finding what's been extremely useful for them, because if things that you haven't thought of are extremely useful for them, likely they could be extremely useful for other folks in the organization.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And then, obviously the last thing is to plan new feature and service adoption based off of user feedback, and then also just looking at what's in the roadmap for Office 365. I mean, they're constantly adding new features to existing services. So like Teams wasn't even a thing, a year and a half ago.
Right.
And now Teams is like a fully featured product for the most part. And they're adding new features and abilities every day. And people are like, well, how do I even use this thing? So you might have a service rollout of just Teams to get users comfortable with Teams. And then like have a monthly, hey, did you know this thing now exists in whatever your company newsletter is or something. Or do like a lunch and learn, 10 new features in Office 365 and how to use them.
Right, or promote other services that you're not necessarily using. Maybe you have some small project teams, and Planner might be perfect for them.
Right.
So target some of the user groups, let them know, teach them or help them with some of these new services, gain adoption.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about you're paying for the license. You have all the features.
Right.
Let's use them.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally makes sense. All right. Well, that's pretty much all we wanted to talk about for this piece of Office 365. Sort of how do you get migrated and implemented? As an introduction of a NextNet, at NextNet, we believe that everyone deserves a great digital experience, and that is especially true of Office 365. It is a digital experience, and enabling and enhancing that process is a lot of what we do, is trying to get people to that great digital experience. There's 4 key categories that we work in as a company. Customer engagement is about building beautiful and responsive designed applications, that the front end of customer engaging applications, creating enterprise mobility strategy and applications for your internal users to use on their mobile devices. AI and analytics is all about taking the data that you ingest from multiple different sources and try to unlock some value and insights about them. And then lastly, cloud and hybrid IT, which is really what Office 365 generally falls under, is boosting your performance and your efficiencies by adopting best practices, whether it's on-premises or in the cloud. If you've enjoyed today's presentation, you want to know how to get started with more, we do have an Office 365 Kickstart that will help you, get further down that avenue of how to envision and plan your migration, doing the actual migration itself, and then helping out with some of those post-migration driving value components. With that, I would like to turn it over for some questions. So if anybody has a question, please type it in the chat box, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. I see we've got at least one question already queued up in there. Oh, this is something that we didn't get to too much because we're actually going to have a whole other webinar about this. But the question is, what does Microsoft do for security in Office 365?
Great question.
Yeah, it's great. And we all have a whole webinar just about that. So there will be a future webinar, but just to kind of like summarize things really quickly on that, Microsoft has what's called a shared responsibility model with Office 365. So they take care of the physical, data centers where it runs, the servers it runs on, the patching and maintenance of the applications that make up those services. But at a certain point, the responsibility flips over to you to make sure that you're configuring your instance of that service appropriately and that you're securing your data that you're storing in Office 365 security. And so Microsoft provides a number of tools to help you do that, but some of that is your responsibility. So I guess it's kind of a Microsoft does a lot, and then you have to do some.
Right. And Microsoft provides a lot of the tools to do that around their product suite. Or there's third-party tools that integrate really well with Office 365.
Yeah. The next question is, I've got a bunch of field users that only have a tablet or phone. How would they fit in with Office 365? That's a situation we've actually had to deal with a decent amount.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's traveling salespeople or we did some work with a transportation company that had drivers that just had a tablet.
Yeah, and we've done work with construction companies that their drivers, so their trucks, they go out and do inspections. They have a tablet. They take a picture, for inspection that what they're inspecting. It connects them directly to SharePoint.
Right.
Adds the picture to the library, gives geolocation of that picture,
right,
and provides that to everyone else.
Yes. So you don't necessarily need like a full-blown desktop with Office Pro Plus to use.
Absolutely.
And in fact, there's a special licenses. I think it's the E1 like kiosk license that gives the end user just the web version, or maybe even the app version.
Well, and if it's your mobile devices, they have great applications. So
yeah,
Outlook alone will have its own application. You don't have to use the inherent ActiveSync.
I actually recommend that you don't.
Right. And there's a SharePoint app, a great SharePoint app that gives you a lot of that SharePoint functionality that you're looking for versus just going to a URL in Safari or something.
Right. Yeah.
Which the experience can be a little lackluster. So really adds those capabilities to your mobile devices using those apps.
Right. Next question is, how long does a typical migration take? That's a loaded question. Can I give the answer? It depends.
I was waiting for it. Yes.
That's really the case, right?
Yeah. I mean, it really depends what we're migrating from, what the current environment is like.
Mm-hmm.
And then also it depends a lot, and this is what we talk about a lot with our customers, is inherent risk. So generally we can move those migrations extremely quick if that's what you're looking for. But inherently there's more risk with moving quickly a lot of times.
Right.
So we try to strike that balance of, we don't want this to take 12 months. We want to start using our investment. We don't want a third of the time we paid for our licenses used before we even start using it.
Yeah, that's not great.
Right. So we try to strike a balance that there's acceptable risk with those migrations,
mm-hmm.
and that is not at a snail's pace as well.
Yeah. No, those are great points. I would just add that we tend to spend more time in the planning than some consulting firms might do, because we feel like you really need to have a solid plan going in, and it'll make your actual migration and deployment time that much faster. And the planning doesn't impact end users. The deployment really does. So it's better to spend more time on planning and have your migration go quickly than vice versa.
Right. And I mean, that's a great point about your users. It depends, their appetite for change as well. So we've had scenarios where, we've done a big bang migration over a weekend. And Monday morning, Friday users left. Monday morning, they had Office 365. To other scenarios where, we'd migrate 250, 500 mailboxes a week for, 12 weeks to get everyone migrated. So,
yeah, it depends.
Yeah, back to it depends.
Looks like we might have one more question. How hard is it to move SharePoint? I feel your pain.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, when it comes to migrating SharePoint, it depends on how customized your on-prem SharePoint is. Basically what it comes down to.
That was going to be my main point. Yeah.
If you've stayed relatively vanilla and used the standard stuff, then you're probably going to be all right.
Right. If you have some document libraries and some things stored there, those can generally be fairly easy to move. If there's a lot of custom workflows and design with something like K2 or some other forms, that can get challenging, and some things may need to be rewritten for that.
Right, because you got to remember, with SharePoint Online, you don't have access to the servers directly. So some of the customizations or special plugins, there's nowhere to install them.
Exactly.
So, and a lot of times those plugins were to deal with things or features that didn't exist in SharePoint.
Yeah.
And so they had to add it. At this point, a lot of that stuff can be handled through Logic apps or other services that exist in Office 365 without having to install these like weird plugins and stuff. So I think you have to look at what you did, why you did it, and then see if there's something that exists in SharePoint Online or the services around it that'll allow you to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, we're about running out of time for today's webinar. So I just want to take a moment and say thank you to everyone who attended today. We really appreciate your time and attention. I know everyone's super busy. If you have questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, feel free to send them directly to one of us. You can hit me up on Twitter, Ned1313, or you can hit up an XNet.
Yep.
We will send a follow-up communication so you could attach to that, because we do want to get to all questions. But
yeah,
also,
feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and my email's there, my phone number's there, so
okay,
happy for you to reach out.
Awesome. Okay, so thank you again to everyone who joined today, and hopefully you'll attend for the upcoming security webinar for Office 365, and we'll see you there. Take care, everyone. Thanks again.
Thanks.